The Galactic Academy's pristine white corridors hummed with nervous energy as Ambassador Kethrall walked toward classroom Zeta 7. Her crystalline skin reflected the soft blue lighting, but today even her natural luminescence seemed dimmed by worry. In her forearms, she clutched the most controversial admission file in the Academy's 1,000-year history. Behind the reinforced doors waited 37 of the galaxy's brightest young minds, representing 12 different species from across the spiral arm. They had come here to study interspecies diplomacy, xenobiology, and peaceful coexistence. What they didn't know was that their carefully planned curriculum was about to be shattered. The file in Kethrall's hands bore a single word that made her throat sacs flutter with anxiety. Human. 3 cycles ago, first contact had been established with a species from a small blue world in the Outer Rim. The initial reports had been disturbing. The humans came from what the scientific community had classified as a Class 12 Deathworld, a planet so hostile that most civilized species would consider it uninhabitable. Predators at every level of the food chain, weather systems that could level cities, seismic activity that would crack most colonial habitats in half, and radiation levels that would require heavy shielding for most galactic citizens. But somehow, impossibly, the humans had not just survived, they had thrived. The door scanner recognized Kethrall's biometric signature with a soft chime. As the barriers retracted, she stepped into the classroom where her students waited in their species-appropriate seating arrangements. The Vithrak delegation floated in their environmental suits, their tentacles writhing with curiosity. The crystalline Zephyrians sat perfectly still, their geometric forms catching and refracting light in mesmerizing patterns. The mammalian Koreth had claimed the back rows, their large eyes already focused on their instructor with predatory attention. "Students," Kethrall began, her voice carrying the harmonic overtones that marked her species' formal speech patterns. "Today we begin an unprecedented chapter in our Academy's history. We have been honored, and I use that term deliberately, to host our first exchange student from a newly discovered species." A ripple of excitement passed through the classroom. Exchange programs were rare and highly coveted. Most species had to prove decades of peaceful development before being considered for inclusion. "The individual joining us today comes from a world that challenges everything we thought we knew about habitability and survival," Kethrall continued. "I must ask for your patience and understanding as we navigate this unique situation together." The Vithrak delegate, Silthara, raised a questioning tentacle. "Ambassador, surely any species advanced enough for space travel would share our fundamental values of peace and cooperation." Kethrall's skin flickered, a nervous response she couldn't quite suppress. "That assumption, dear student, is precisely what makes this exchange so educational." Before she could elaborate, the classroom's communication system activated with a gentle tone. "Ambassador Kethrall, your guest has arrived. Shall we send them in?" Every student in the room tensed. The air recycling systems seemed to grow louder in the sudden silence. "Please do," Kethrall replied, her voice steadier than she felt. The door opened, and the human walked in. The first thing that struck the assembled students was the predator's gait. Where most sentient species moved with careful consideration for their surroundings, the human strode forward with fluid confidence. Its eyes, binocular vision, clearly evolved for hunting, swept across the room with casual assessment. The human was smaller than many had expected, standing barely 2 meters tall with a lean frame that spoke of efficiency rather than intimidation. But there was something in the way it moved, in the casual set of its shoulders, that made several students unconsciously shift in their seats. "Good morning, everyone," the human said, its voice carrying none of the harmonic complexity of more civilized species, yet somehow more direct and immediate than any communication they were used to. "I'm Marcus Chen, And I'm probably not what any of you were expecting. The human, Marcus, smiled, revealing teeth that were clearly adapted for both plant and meat consumption. Several students recognized the dental pattern immediately. Omnivore, predator and prey combined. Yeath, a young Korath whose species was among the more physically capable in the galaxy, found his courage first. We were told you come from a dangerous world. You seem normal enough? Marcus's smile widened and something in his eyes shifted, a glint that made the hair on Yeath's neck stand up. Oh, I appreciate that. Earth is pretty dangerous, it's true. We've got storms that can level cities, predators that hunt in coordinated packs, insects that can kill you with a single bite, and weather systems that swing from freezing to deadly hot in a matter of hours. The Zephyrian delegation, beings of pure logic, processed this information with visible confusion. Their crystalline forms chimed softly as they communicated among themselves in subsonic frequencies. But surely your technology protects you from such hazards, asked Veltar, the senior Zephyrian. To some extent, Marcus agreed, settling into a chair that had been hastily modified for his physiology. But we kind of learned to work with our environment instead of against it. Where I come from, we have a saying, adapt or die. We chose adaptation. Silthera's tentacles writhed with fascination. Your world sounds terrifying. How does your species achieve the mental stability necessary for advanced civilization when constantly under threat? Marcus considered the question with genuine thoughtfulness. I think that's exactly what gave us the stability. When your environment is trying to kill you every day, you learn to work together. You learn to think fast, to innovate, to never give up. Some of my best memories are from camping trips, where everything went wrong, storms, equipment failures, getting lost. We called those character-building experiences. Character building? Yeath repeated. You intentionally subjected yourselves to dangerous situations? For fun, Marcus confirmed with that unsettling smile. We call it recreation. The classroom fell silent except for the hum of life support systems. Kethral watched her students process this information, seeing their worldviews beginning to shift and crack. I brought some pictures, Marcus continued, producing a small device. Thought you might like to see what home looks like. The holographic display activated, showing a blue-green world that looked deceptively peaceful from orbit. Then the images began to cycle through surface shots. Massive storms with lightning that could power a space station, erupting volcanoes spewing molten rock, vast predators stalking through dense jungles, and waves of water crashing against rocky shores with enough force to pulverize stone. But what made the students lean forward in their seats weren't the disasters. It was the humans in the images. They weren't hiding from these forces of nature. They were surfing the waves, climbing the volcanoes, diving with the massive sea predators, and standing in open fields watching the lightning dance across the sky. This is impossible, whispered Veltar. No sentient species would voluntarily expose themselves to such dangers. Marcus turned to face the Zephyrian directly, and his expression grew serious. See, that's where you're wrong. We don't see them as dangers to hide from. We see them as challenges to overcome. Every storm taught us about weather patterns. Every predator taught us about hunting and defense. Every disaster taught us to be stronger, faster, smarter. But the mortality rate, began another student. High, Marcus admitted. Very high for a long time. But the survivors? We learned things that species from safer worlds never had to learn. We learned that when everything goes wrong, you don't stop fighting. You adapt. You overcome. You survive. The young Korath, Yeath, stared at the human with a mixture of horror and fascination. You're describing an entire species of apex predators who see disaster as entertainment. Marcus laughed, a sound that somehow conveyed both warmth and an edge that made several students shift uncomfortably. You know what? That's not entirely wrong. But here's the thing you're missing. We're not just apex predators. We're apex everything. Predators when we need to hunt, pack animals when we need to work together, problem solvers when we need to innovate, and caregivers when someone needs help. That's not how evolution works, Veltar protested. Species specialize. They find a niche and optimize for it. Most species, Marcus agreed. But Earth didn't give us the luxury of specialization. We had to be everything to everyone, including ourselves. A human can track a wounded animal across broken terrain for days, then come home and spend hours carefully nursing a sick child back to health. We can kill when we need to survive, and we can sacrifice ourselves to save a stranger. The implications of what Marcus was saying began to sink into the room. Kethral watched her students' faces, seeing the exact moment when they realized what they were dealing with. This wasn't just a representative of a dangerous species. This was a representative of a species that had evolved to be dangerous in every possible way, while somehow maintaining the social bonds necessary for civilization. "I have a question," Silthera said, her voice carefully controlled. "Your species achieved spaceflight. You have advanced technology. Why maintain these primitive survival behaviors?" Marcus's expression grew distant for a moment, as if he were seeing something beyond the classroom walls. "Because those behaviors aren't primitive. They're what makes us human. Strip away our technology, drop us naked on an unknown world, and we'll still figure out a way to survive. Maybe even thrive. Our machines can break, our ships can crash, our colonies can fail, but as long as there's one human left breathing, we'll keep going. And if there are no resources, no food, no water, no shelter," pressed Yith. Marcus met his gaze directly, and the young Korath felt something primal stir in his chest, the recognition of a superior predator. "Then we'll make some, or find some, or take some. We don't have a word in any human language for impossible, only for haven't figured out how yet." The silence that followed was profound. 37 of the galaxy's brightest young minds sat in stunned contemplation of what they had just learned. They had expected to meet a primitive representative from a backwards world. Instead, they were face to face with something far more unsettling, a member of a species that had turned one of the most hostile environments in the known galaxy into a playground. "Tomorrow," Kethral announced, her voice carrying a slight tremor, "we will be conducting a series of practical exercises designed to help you better understand human approaches to problem-solving and survival. I encourage you all to approach these activities with open minds and perhaps a degree of caution." As the students filed out, chattering nervously among themselves, Marcus remained seated, still smiling that predator's smile. "Ambassador," he said to Kethral, "I hope I didn't scare them too badly." Kethral's crystalline skin flickered with complex emotions. "Mr. Chen, I fear you may have done exactly what we needed you to do." The next morning, classroom Zeta 7 had been transformed. Gone were the comfortable, species-appropriate seating arrangements and gentle environmental controls. In their place stood a stark chamber with basic equipment, emergency rations, and what looked suspiciously like an obstacle course. Marcus Chen stood at the front of the room, no longer the casual visitor from the day before. Today he wore what he had described as practical clothing, dark, form-fitting materials that seemed designed for movement and utility rather than comfort or appearance. The change in his demeanor was immediately apparent to every student who entered. "Good morning, class," he said, as the last student settled into the temporary seating. "Today we're going to play a game." The word play sent an immediate chill through the assembled beings. After yesterday's revelations, none of them were comfortable with a human's definition of recreational activity. Yith, the young Korath who had shown the most curiosity during the previous session, raised a tentative hand. "What kind of Game? Marcus's smile was different today, less reassuring, more anticipatory. It's called Scenario Survival. Very popular training exercise back home. I've adapted it to be safe for non-Deathworlders, so don't worry too much. The phrase, "don't worry too much," had exactly the opposite effect. Several students exchanged nervous glances. The premise is simple, Marcus continued, activating a holographic display that showed a three-dimensional star map. Your diplomatic vessel has experienced a critical system failure in an unknown sector. You've managed to reach the nearest habitable planet, but your long-range communications are down, your emergency supplies are limited, and rescue isn't coming for at least 60 standard days. The map zoomed in to show a planet that looked deceptively Earth-like. Blue oceans, green continents, white clouds swirling through a breathable atmosphere. The good news, Marcus said, is that the planet appears to be habitable for all your species. The bad news is that initial scans show complex ecosystems with unknown variables. You'll need to establish shelter, locate food and water sources, identify potential threats, and signal for rescue. Silthara's tentacles writhed with agitation. This is a theoretical exercise, correct? We won't actually be placed in danger? Of course it's theoretical, Marcus assured her. But I want you to approach it as if your lives depended on your decisions. Because in the real galaxy, they might. Ambassador Kethrall, who had been observing from the side of the room, stepped forward. Students, this exercise has been approved by the Academy's Board of Directors. While challenging, it has been designed to be entirely safe. Mr. Chen has extensive experience in survival training. Extensive experience in staying alive in places that try to kill you, Marcus clarified with characteristic directness. There's a difference. The first scenario began immediately. The lights dimmed, and the holographic display enveloped the classroom, creating the illusion that they were standing on the shore of an alien ocean. The sound of waves filled the air, along with the distant cries of unknown creatures. You've just made planetfall, Marcus announced. Your shuttle is damaged beyond repair, but you've managed to salvage some basic supplies. You have water purification tablets sufficient for 3 days, emergency rations for 1 week, basic hand tools, and a short-range scanner. What's your first priority? The Zephyrian delegation began communicating in their subsonic frequency, their crystalline forms chiming with rapid analysis. The Vithrak students clustered together, tentacles weaving complex patterns as they shared thoughts. The Korath sat in predatory stillness, large eyes scanning the simulated environment. Shelter, announced Veltar after a moment of consideration. Exposure to unknown weather patterns could be immediately fatal. Reasonable choice, Marcus nodded. Yith, do you agree? The young Korath shifted uncomfortably. I would say water. The purification tablets only last 3 days. Without a renewable water source, shelter becomes irrelevant. Also reasonable. Silthara? The Vithrak's tentacles coiled thoughtfully. Signal for rescue. Every moment we delay increases the chance that search vessels will move beyond our location. 3 different priorities, all logical from your species' perspectives, Marcus observed. This is exactly the kind of thinking that gets people killed. The statement hung in the air like a challenge. The students stared at him, waiting for explanation. You're all thinking like civilized beings from safe worlds, Marcus continued. You're prioritizing based on your species' evolved strengths and comfort zones. Veltar, your people are builders, so you think in terms of structures. Yith, your people are hunters, so you think in terms of resources. Silthara, your people are communicators, so you think in terms of connection. What would you prioritize? Yith asked, though something in his voice suggested he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. Marcus gestured toward the simulated environment. Information. Before you can make any meaningful decision about shelter, water, or signaling, you need to understand what you're dealing with. What are those sounds in the distance? What's causing that discoloration in the water? Why are there no visible animal tracks on this beach despite obvious signs of life? He activated additional details in the simulation. Suddenly, the students could see what they had missed in their rush to apply standard survival protocols. Odd gaps in the vegetation patterns, unusual coloration in the water near the shore, and the complete absence of insects or small creatures that should have been abundant. Rule 1 of survival, Marcus said, his voice taking on an instructional tone that somehow carried more authority than any professor they had studied under. Assume your environment is trying to kill you until proven otherwise. Rule 2. Information equals life. The more you understand about your situation, the better your chances of living through it. But that's paranoid thinking, protested another student. Crix, a Matharian whose species had achieved spaceflight through pure intellectual development on a world with virtually no natural predators. Marcus turned to face Crix directly. Paranoid thinking is why humans are still alive. Let me show you something. The simulation shifted, and suddenly they were looking at a beach that appeared identical to the first. But this time, Marcus guided their attention to details they had overlooked. The too regular spacing of certain plants, the metallic sheen in what had appeared to be normal sand, the fact that the waves hitting the shore followed a pattern that didn't match natural tidal activity. This is a real location from a world humans discovered 18 months ago, Marcus explained. Beautiful Earth-like planet, perfect atmosphere, abundant water, seemingly ideal for colonization. The first survey team followed standard protocols. They prioritized establishing a base camp, set up communication equipment, and began systematic exploration. The simulation showed human figures moving across the beach, setting up sophisticated equipment, working with the confident efficiency of trained professionals. What they didn't notice, Marcus continued, was that they had landed in the middle of a territorial claim belonging to a species of subterranean hunters. The regular plant spacing marked the boundaries of individual hunting grounds. The metallic sand was actually a sensory network that allowed the creatures to track surface movement across several square kilometers. The classroom fell silent except for the artificial sound of waves. The rescue team found the camp exactly as it had been left, Marcus said quietly. Equipment functioning perfectly, supplies intact, no signs of struggle. The only things missing were the people. That's horrible, whispered Silthara. That's Tuesday on a death world, Marcus replied matter-of-factly. The second survey team approached the same planet with what you call paranoid thinking. They assumed everything was potentially hostile. They gathered information before making any permanent decisions, and they maintained constant awareness of their environment. They discovered the subterranean hunters within 6 hours and established successful diplomatic contact within a week. The simulation reset to the original scenario. Let's try this again. Same situation, but this time I want you to think like your lives depend on it. What's your first priority now? This time, the response was unanimous. Information. Better. Now, how do you gather information safely in an unknown environment? The students looked at each other, then back at Marcus. These were concepts that simply weren't covered in standard diplomatic training. Observation from a distance, suggested Yith after a moment. Use the scanner to analyze the environment before direct contact. Good start. What else? Small tests, added Veltar. Rather than committing to a full course of action, try limited experiments to gauge responses. Excellent. Silthara, multiple backup plans. If our primary approach fails, we need alternatives already prepared. Marcus nodded approvingly. Now you're thinking like survivors. Let's apply this approach. The next hour was unlike anything the students had experienced in their academic careers. Marcus guided them through a series of scenarios that required not just intellectual analysis, but adaptive thinking under pressure. Each situation built upon the last, forcing them to consider variables they had never encountered in their peaceful home systems. They learned to read environmental signs that could indicate danger, the behavior of local wildlife, unusual geological formations, atmospheric conditions that might suggest invisible threats. They practice making decisions with incomplete information, balancing caution with the need for action. Most challenging of all, they learned to think like predators. Your species evolved different strengths, Marcus explained during a brief break. The Zephyrians have perfect logical analysis. The Vithrak have instantaneous communication. The Koreth have enhanced sensory awareness. The Methranes have creative problem-solving abilities. These are all valuable assets. But when survival is on the line, you need to add one more tool to your arsenal: predator instinct. What does that mean exactly? Asked Crix. Marcus considered how to explain a concept that was instinctual for humans but alien to most galactic species. It means learning to think in terms of advantage and vulnerability. When you enter any new situation, part of your mind should automatically assess, what are my strengths here? What are my weaknesses? What could hurt me? What could I use to protect myself? How could I gain the upper hand if necessary? That seems aggressive, observed Veltar. Awareness isn't aggression, Marcus corrected. A deer has predator instincts. It's constantly alert for threats, always ready to run, always evaluating its environment for danger. That's not aggression. That's survival. The difference with humans is that we can choose to be the deer or the wolf depending on what the situation requires. And if the situation requires you to be the wolf? Yith asked quietly. Marcus met his gaze steadily. Then we're very, very good wolves. The afternoon session introduced them to practical applications. Marcus had set up a series of physical challenges that required not just problem-solving, but physical coordination, teamwork, and adaptation to unexpected changes. None of the challenges were dangerous, but they were designed to push the students out of their comfort zones. The most revealing exercise involved what Marcus called resource competition. The students were divided into species groups and given a scenario where limited resources had to be allocated among competing priorities. As the exercise progressed, Marcus introduced complications, equipment failures, environmental changes, the discovery of new information that rendered previous decisions obsolete. What fascinated and disturbed the students was watching Marcus demonstrate the human approach to the same challenges. Where they had applied logical analysis and careful consensus building, Marcus moved with fluid adaptability, constantly shifting his approach based on new information, never becoming locked into a single strategy. "How do you make decisions so quickly?" Silthera asked after watching Marcus complete a resource allocation puzzle in minutes that had taken her team over an hour. "Pattern recognition and acceptable risk assessment," Marcus replied. "Humans are really good at making decisions with incomplete information because we had to be. Our brains evolved to quickly identify patterns, make rapid judgments, and act on probabilities rather than certainties." "But what if you're wrong?" Marcus shrugged. "Then we adapt. Make a new decision based on new information. The key is not to be paralyzed by the possibility of making the wrong choice. On Earth, indecision kills you faster than bad decisions." "That's a terrifying way to live," observed Crix. "It's an exciting way to live," Marcus countered. "Every challenge is an opportunity to grow stronger, smarter, more capable. Every problem you solve makes you better equipped to handle the next one." As the day drew to a close, the students found themselves looking at their instructor with a mixture of respect and concern. Marcus had shown them a fundamentally different approach to existence, one that embraced uncertainty, thrived on challenge, and treated every obstacle as a puzzle to be solved rather than a barrier to be avoided. "Tomorrow," Marcus announced as they prepared to leave, "we'll explore what happens when different species need to work together under survival conditions. I think you'll find it educational." As the students filed out, their conversations were noticeably different from the day before. Instead of theoretical discussions about xenobiology and diplomatic protocols, they were talking about environmental assessment, risk evaluation, and adaptive strategies. Kethrall approached Marcus as the classroom emptied. "Mr. Chen, I must ask, these survival scenarios you've presented, how many of them are based on actual human experiences?" Marcus's expression grew thoughtful. "All of them. Humans have faced every one of these situations, and worse, at some point in our history. The only difference is that we usually didn't have the luxury of training exercises. We learned these lessons when our lives actually depended on getting them right. And the mistakes? The scenarios where the wrong choice leads to death? We learned from those too," Marcus said quietly. "Usually the hard way. Every human alive today carries the genetic legacy of ancestors who made the right choices when it mattered. The ones who made the wrong choices, well, they didn't pass on their genes." Kethrall's crystalline form flickered with complex emotions. "You're describing a species forged by constant selection pressure for survival traits." "Exactly. And tomorrow, your students are going to learn what happens when that selection pressure shaped not just our individual capabilities, but our social behaviors as well." As Marcus gathered his materials, Kethrall couldn't shake the feeling that they were only beginning to understand what they had invited into their academy. The human was friendly, helpful, and genuinely seemed to care about the students' education. But underneath that civilized exterior lurked something that had been shaped by forces her species had never experienced and couldn't truly comprehend. The Deathworlder was just getting started. The final day of Marcus Chen's guest instruction began with an announcement that sent ripples of nervous anticipation through classroom Zeta 7. "Today we will be conducting a comprehensive survival simulation," Marcus explained to the assembled students. "This exercise will combine everything you've learned over the past 2 days and add one crucial element: interspecies cooperation under extreme stress." Ambassador Kethrall stood beside him, her crystalline form reflecting the morning light with unusual intensity. "This simulation has been approved by the Academy's Ethics Committee and will be monitored by emergency medical teams. However, I want to be absolutely clear. You will be placed under genuine stress. The scenarios you face will be designed to push you beyond your comfort zones." "How genuine is genuine stress?" asked Yith, though his posture suggested he already suspected the answer would be unsettling. Marcus smiled, that predator's smile that the students had learned to associate with revelations that challenged their understanding of the universe. "Genuine enough that your bodies will react as if the danger were real, even though we'll maintain safety protocols throughout. Think of it as controlled fear." The classroom itself had been transformed overnight into something resembling a starship's emergency shelter. The walls now displayed real-time environmental readings from an unknown star system. Warning lights pulsed with amber urgency, and the air carried the subtle tang of recycled atmosphere under strain. "The scenario," Marcus continued, activating a holographic display that filled the center of the room, "is straightforward. Your mixed-species research vessel has suffered critical damage while investigating an anomalous energy signature in uncharted space. Primary power is failing, life support is operating on backup systems, and you've detected an approaching phenomenon that will make your current position untenable within 6 hours." The hologram showed a sleek vessel, clearly damaged, with energy discharges crackling around its hull. In the distance, a massive spatial distortion grew steadily larger, its edges writhing with forces that defied easy categorization. "The good news," Marcus said, "is that sensors have detected a habitable system within range of your remaining fuel reserves. The bad news is that the journey will require precise coordination, resource management, and decisions that affect everyone's survival." Silthara's tentacles coiled with nervous energy. What kind of decisions? The kind where there are no perfect solutions, Marcus replied. The kind where someone might have to sacrifice something important for the group's survival. The kind that reveal what a species truly values when everything else is stripped away. The simulation began immediately. The lights dimmed to emergency levels, and the soft hum of the classroom's environmental systems was replaced by the irregular cycling of damaged life support. A computer voice began announcing system failures in calm, measured tones that somehow made the situation feel more urgent rather than less. Primary navigation is offline. Backup systems show 47% accuracy. Recommend manual course corrections. Atmospheric recycling operating at 62% efficiency. Estimated breathable atmosphere remaining 4 hours, 18 minutes. Hull breach in Section C. Emergency containment fields holding. The students looked at each other with growing anxiety. The simulation was more immersive than any training scenario they had experienced. Their bodies were reacting to the stress indicators exactly as Marcus had promised. Your first decision point, Marcus announced, consulting a datapad that seemed to be showing real system readings. You can attempt to repair the navigation system, which would improve your chances of reaching the habitable system, but would require taking life support offline for approximately 40 minutes. Or you can proceed with manual navigation and accept the reduced accuracy. The students immediately began what had become their standard approach, species-based discussion groups analyzing the problem from their unique perspectives. But Marcus interrupted before they could settle into their comfortable patterns. Time factor, he said simply. You have 60 seconds to decide. In a real emergency, you don't get extended deliberation time. The statement sent a shock through the room. 60 seconds was barely enough time for the Zephyrians to complete their logical analysis protocols, let alone for the group to reach consensus through democratic discussion. That's impossible, protested Veltar. Proper decision-making requires thorough analysis of all variables. Proper decision-making requires making a choice before the opportunity disappears, Marcus countered. 45 seconds. What followed was unlike anything in the students' academic experience. Instead of orderly discussion, the room erupted in rapid, overlapping conversations. Species barriers began to break down as individuals started speaking directly to whoever was closest rather than consulting within their traditional groups. 30 seconds. Yith, the young Korath, suddenly stood up. We take the risk. Repair navigation. 40 minutes without life support is survivable if we reduce activity levels. Better navigation gives us better odds of survival long term. 15 seconds. Agreed, called out Crix. Motion seconded, added Silthara. Consensus, chimed the Zephyrian delegation. Time, Marcus announced. Navigation repair authorized. Life support going offline in 3, 2, 1. The environmental system shut down with an audible sigh, and suddenly the room felt different. The air seemed to still, and everyone became acutely aware of their breathing. Marcus activated a countdown timer showing 39 minutes and 43 seconds. Congratulations, he said, his voice carrying easily in the silence. You've just made your first survival decision under pressure. Note how different it felt from yesterday's discussions. The students nodded, many of them still breathing hard from the adrenaline surge. Next decision point, Marcus continued. Your repair efforts have been successful, but the navigation computer is showing multiple possible courses to the habitable system. One route is faster, but requires passing through an asteroid field. Another is longer, but safer. The third involves a gravitational assist maneuver that could save fuel but risks structural damage to your already compromised hull. This time, the students didn't wait for a countdown. The artificial emergency had taught them that deliberation was a luxury they couldn't afford. What's our hull integrity status? Asked Yith. Marcus consulted his datapad. 78%. Ship's computer estimates 40% chance of critical failure if you attempt the gravitational assist. Fuel reserves? Demanded Veltar. 61% of requirements for the safe route, 83% for the asteroid field route, 57% for the gravitational assist. The implications were immediate and stark. The safe route would leave them stranded in space. The asteroid field was dangerous but survivable. The gravitational assist was a gamble that could save them or kill them. How good are humans at navigating asteroid fields? Silthara asked suddenly. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Is that your question? Or are you asking me to take over navigation? I'm asking if our pilot should be making the decision, she replied, and suddenly every eye in the room was on Marcus. It was a moment that revealed something profound about what the students had learned. They weren't just asking Marcus to solve their problem, they were recognizing that different species brought different capabilities to survival situations, and that leadership should go to whoever was best equipped for the specific challenge. In a real emergency, that's exactly the right thinking, Marcus said approvingly. Species expertise should determine task assignment, not protocol or rank. Yes, humans are very good at navigating dangerous obstacles under pressure. We've been doing it for millennia. Asteroid field route, announced Yith. Marcus navigates. The simulation shifted, and suddenly, the holographic display showed a dense field of tumbling rocks, each one large enough to destroy their vessel. Marcus took control of the virtual ship systems, and the students watched in fascination as he threaded them through the maze with fluid precision. But what captivated them wasn't just his skill. It was his obvious enjoyment of the challenge. Where they felt stress and fear, Marcus displayed the focused intensity of a predator in its element. This is actually fun for you, observed Crix with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Absolutely, Marcus confirmed, executing a maneuver that brought them within meters of a massive asteroid surface. This is what humans call living on the edge. It's where we perform best. They emerged from the asteroid field with minor hull damage, but significantly ahead of schedule. The countdown timer now showed 3 hours and 12 minutes of life support remaining, and they were within range of the habitable system. Final decision point, Marcus announced, and his tone carried a weight that made everyone pay immediate attention. Sensors are showing the habitable planet, but there's a complication. The planet appears to be inhabited by a pre-spaceflight civilization. Galactic law prohibits contact with developing species. However, your life support won't last long enough to reach the next nearest habitable world. The simulation showed a beautiful blue-green planet, clearly teeming with life. Cities were visible on the night side, but they showed the energy signatures of early industrial development, not advanced technology. The ethical violation would be severe, Veltar pointed out. Contact could contaminate their natural development. And staying in space means we all die, countered Yith. Could we land in an uninhabited area? Suggested Silthara. Minimize contact while ensuring survival? Marcus nodded approvingly. Good thinking. But there's another factor. Your damaged ship is leaking exotic radiation that could contaminate any ecosystem you land near. A remote landing protects the inhabitants but potentially damages the biosphere. The weight of the decision settled over the students like a physical force. They were being asked to choose between their own survival, the protection of a developing civilization, and the preservation of an entire planet's ecosystem. There was no solution that didn't require sacrifice. How long do we have to decide? Asked Crix. 23 minutes until life support fails completely, Marcus replied. But atmospheric entry procedures need to begin in 8 minutes if you're going to attempt a landing. The discussion that followed was unlike anything in their previous academic experience. These weren't theoretical ethics problems discussed in comfortable classrooms. The artificial emergency had made the stakes feel real, and their bodies were reacting with genuine stress responses. Arguments began and were quickly abandoned as new factors were considered. Traditional species hierarchies collapsed as students found themselves speaking directly to individuals whose expertise was relevant, regardless of species or academic rank. "What would humans do?" Yith asked suddenly. Marcus considered the question seriously. "Historically? We'd land. Survival first, deal with consequences later. But we'd also take responsibility for minimizing harm and fixing any damage we caused." "That's selfish," protested Veltar. "That's practical," Marcus replied. "Dead beings can't help anyone. Live beings can spend their remaining years working to repair any damage they caused." 5 minutes to entry window," the computer announced. Silthera stood up, her tentacles writhing with decision. "We land. Remote location to minimize contact. We take full responsibility for any environmental damage and dedicate our remaining lives to repairing it once we're rescued." "Seconded," called Yith. "Those in favor?" Every hand, tentacle, and appendage in the room rose. "Unanimous," Marcus observed, "and reached faster than any previous decision. You're learning." The simulation ran through the landing sequence, showing their damaged vessel touching down in a mountainous region far from any signs of civilization. Emergency systems activated, providing basic life support while they waited for rescue. "Simulation complete," Marcus announced, and the classroom lights returned to normal. The holographic displays faded, leaving them sitting in their familiar academic environment. But something fundamental had changed. The students looked at each other differently now, seeing not just representatives of other species, but individuals who had shared genuine stress, made hard decisions together, and proven they could function as a team when survival was at stake. "What did you learn?" Marcus asked. "That decision-making under pressure is completely different from academic analysis," said Veltar. "Logic alone isn't sufficient when time is a factor. That species expertise matters more than species politics," added Yith. "Leadership should go to whoever can best handle the specific situation." "That there are no perfect solutions," said Silthera. "Sometimes survival requires accepting ethical compromises and taking responsibility for fixing them later. That working together under stress creates bonds that don't exist in normal circumstances," observed Crix. Marcus nodded approvingly. "All correct. But there's one more lesson that's specifically human." He stood and faced the class, his expression more serious than they had seen before. "Every single situation you face today was based on actual human experiences. Ship failures in unknown space, navigation through dangerous obstacles, ethical dilemmas involving primitive civilizations, resource allocation under extreme pressure. Humans have lived through all of these scenarios and worse." The implications of what he was saying began to sink in. "We don't train for survival situations because we find them interesting academic exercises," Marcus continued. "We train for them because they're Tuesday for us. What you experienced as artificial stress, we experience as normal life. The decision-making patterns you learned today, the team dynamics you developed, the ethical frameworks you applied, those are how humans approach every significant challenge." "That's," Silthera began, then trailed off. "Terrifying," Marcus suggested with a slight smile. "Admirable, insane, all of the above?" "Effective," said Yith quietly. "Terrifyingly effective." Marcus's smile widened. "Now you understand why the galaxy needs to know about humans. Not because we're dangerous, though we can be. Not because we're warlike, though we can fight. But because we represent a completely different approach to existence. We don't just adapt to our environment. We adapt our environment to us. We don't just survive challenges. We seek them out because they make us stronger." Ambassador Kethral, who had been observing from the side of the room, stepped forward. "Students, you have participated in something unprecedented in Academy history. You have experienced human-style crisis management and survived. More importantly, you have learned to think beyond your species' traditional limitations." "What happens now?" asked Veltar. "Now," said Marcus, "you go back to your regular diplomatic training. But you carry with you the knowledge that when things go wrong, and they will go wrong, you have options beyond surrender or despair. You know how to adapt, how to make hard decisions quickly, how to work with other species under pressure." "And what about you?" asked Yith. "Do you return to Earth?" Marcus's expression grew thoughtful. "Actually, the Academy has made me an offer. It seems they think human survival training might be a valuable addition to their curriculum. Apparently, there's demand from other species to learn what you've learned." The students exchanged glances, and suddenly Silthara began what sounded like laughter, a rippling musical sound that was taken up by the other species in their own ways. Even the normally serious Zephyrians chimed in harmonic approval. "You're going to traumatize students from across the galaxy," observed Crix, but his tone was approving. "I'm going to teach them that they're stronger than they think," Marcus corrected. "That's what humans do best. We show others that their limits aren't as fixed as they believed." As the students filed out of the classroom for the final time, their conversations were animated and energetic. They had discovered capabilities they didn't know they possessed, formed bonds that transcended species barriers, and learned to think in ways that would serve them throughout their diplomatic careers. Kethrol approached Marcus as the room emptied. "Mr. Chen, I must ask, was this exercise typical of human education?" Marcus considered the question. "This was actually pretty gentle by human standards. We usually don't get safety monitors and emergency medical teams standing by. And yet your species has achieved remarkable technological and social development despite, or perhaps because of, this approach to learning. That's the thing about humans," Marcus said, gathering his materials. "We don't develop despite the challenges we face. We develop because of them. Every obstacle makes us stronger. Every failure teaches us something new. Every crisis creates an opportunity for growth. It's a remarkable worldview. It's a survival strategy that became a philosophy," Marcus replied. "And now, thanks to the Academy's program, it's something we can share with the rest of the galaxy." As they walked toward the exit, Kethrol asked one final question. "Do you truly believe that other species can learn to think like humans?" Marcus paused at the doorway and looked back at the transformed classroom, where species from across the galaxy had learned to work together under pressure, make difficult decisions quickly, and find strength they didn't know they possessed. "I think," he said finally, "that the galaxy is about to become a much more interesting place. And when the next real crisis comes, the kind where academic protocols don't help and traditional approaches fail, there are going to be 37 beings out there who know how to adapt, overcome, and survive." "You sound like you're looking forward to it." Marcus smiled that predator's smile one final time. "Humans always look forward to the next challenge. It's what makes us human." As they walked down the pristine corridors of the Galactic Academy, neither of them noticed the small groups of students from other classes who had gathered to whisper excitedly about the strange new instructor who had supposedly made an entire class of diplomatic students think like Deathworld predators. Word was already spreading through the Academy's communication networks. Other species wanted to know about this human approach to problem-solving. They wanted to understand how a species from such a dangerous world had developed not into paranoid isolationists, but into adaptable, cooperative, and surprisingly optimistic beings who treated every challenge as an opportunity for growth. The human Deathworlder had laughed at their attempts to intimidate him, had turned their classroom into a survival training ground, and had taught their best students to think like apex predators. And somehow, in the process, he had shown them that the most dangerous thing about humans wasn't their capacity for violence or their resistance to death. It was their absolute refusal to accept that any problem was unsolvable, any challenge was insurmountable, or any situation was hopeless. The galaxy was about to learn what humans meant when they said, "Hold my beer and watch this."